fucking air! But I got shots fired. Shots fired in the backyard. Do not fucking move! Do not fucking move!
Man, after brutally killing a happy couple, came to salon for cutting, but the police was already waiting there to capture him. His name is Andrew James McGann, the former North Texas elementary school teacher.
The brutal murder of Clinton and Kristen Brink in Devil's Den State Park, Arkansas, is one of the most shocking and senseless crimes in recent memory, not only because of the sheer violence, but also because of the tragic circumstances in which it unfolded. A married couple hiking with their 2 young daughters on what should have been a joyful family outing in the quiet embrace of nature, suddenly and brutally attacked by a man they did not know. Their lives taken in a seemingly random act of horror, leaving their daughters to witness the unthinkable and their community struggling to make sense of how something so monstrous could happen in a place considered safe, beautiful, and serene. On July 26, 2025, Clinton David Brink, age 43, and his wife, 41-year-old Kristen Amanda Brink, set out with their daughters for a hike at Devil's Den, a beloved state park in northwest Arkansas, known for its rugged trails, scenic beauty, and family-friendly atmosphere. A park that for decades had been a sanctuary for outdoor enthusiasts, never associated with such savagery. But that day, it would become the site of an unfathomable crime that would forever scar its history. Witnesses later reported a disturbing scene. A man, covered in blood, emerging from the trail and hurrying toward a black sedan, his face streaked, his demeanor panicked, a chilling image that would soon become central to the investigation. That man was later identified as 28-year-old Andrew James McGann, a 5th-grade teacher from Springdale, Arkansas, a figure whose background in education and ordinary public persona made his alleged actions even harder to comprehend, for the image of a schoolteacher, someone entrusted with guiding children, stood in violent opposition to the brutality of the crime he was accused of committing. According to police, McGann had been waiting, deliberately and with planning, inside Devil's Den State Park, where he attacked the Brinks on the trail, a sudden assault that escalated into a vicious stabbing, with both Clinton and Kristen sustaining fatal injuries. The children, ages 7 and 9, were not physically harmed thanks to the extraordinary actions of Kristen, who, in the middle of chaos and terror, is believed to have guided them to safety before returning to help her husband, a decision that tragically placed her back in the path of the killer and cost her life, a detail that underscores her courage and maternal instinct, even in the face of unimaginable danger. The crime scene itself was chaotic, blood on the trail marking a violent struggle, investigators later recovering evidence that showed the victims had fought for their lives and that McGann had injured his hands during the attack, leaving behind a trail of blood that ultimately linked him to the crime through DNA analysis. In the immediate aftermath, the park was shut down, law enforcement agencies swarmed the area, and a manhunt began as the brutality of the murders, committed in broad daylight in a public park, created an urgent and high-stakes pursuit. For days, fear rippled through the community. Families who had once felt safe hiking in the woods suddenly questioning whether it was safe to step outside, while police tracked leads, including eyewitness reports of a black Kia Stinger, the vehicle that witnesses saw the bloodied suspect enter after fleeing the trail. That vehicle became the thread that unraveled the mystery, as investigators traced it to a barbershop in Springdale, about 30 miles away, where McGann was finally arrested after a days-long manhunt. When officers entered the barbershop, they immediately noticed the cuts on his hands, injuries consistent with the struggle at the crime scene, and upon searching his car, they discovered traces of blood believed to belong to the V's, Kutims, corroborating the eyewitness accounts and forensic evidence. The arrest brought some relief, but it also raised profound questions. Who was Andrew James McGann? And why would a man with a background in education, preparing to begin a new teaching job, commit such a heinous act against complete strangers? In the days that followed, disturbing details began to emerge. McGann admitted to police during questioning that he had killed Clinton and Kristen Brink, statements that prosecutors described as confessions, and investigators stated in a preliminary report that the killings were not spontaneous, but planned, suggesting that McGann had waited in the park with the intent to kill. Yet despite this claim of deliberation, law enforcement also said the murders appeared to be a completely random event, with no evidence that the Brinks and McGann knew each other or had any prior contact, leaving the public grappling with the chilling reality that two innocent parents were murdered in front of their children by a stranger for no discernible reason. At McGann's initial court appearance, he was held without bond, charged with 2 counts of capital murder, a charge that carries the death penalty, which prosecutors confirmed they would pursue, underscoring the gravity of the crime and the belief that such an act demanded the harshest possible punishment under Arkansas law. As investigators dug into McGann's past, a complicated picture emerged. Originally from Oklahoma, he had recently moved to Arkansas and secured employment at a local school, though he had not yet started teaching there, and his employment record in previous districts revealed red flags, including a stint at the Louisville Independent School District in Texas, where he worked during the 2022-2023 school year, but was placed on administrative leave following concerns about classroom management, professional judgment, and favoritism toward students, ultimately resigning rather than being terminated. While that internal investigation did not uncover evidence of criminal behavior, it painted a portrait of a man whose professional life was troubled, and those details, when juxtaposed with the violent charges, fueled speculation about whether there were warning signs that had gone unnoticed. For the Brink family, however, such speculation brought no comfort, as the reality remained that Clinton and Kristen, who had recently moved to Prairie Grove, Arkansas, from North Dakota to build a new life, were gone. Their daughters now orphaned, left in the care of relatives, their lives forever scarred by the trauma of watching their parents murdered. The image of those young girls, spared physically, but forced to endure the sight of their parents' brutal deaths, became one of the most heartbreaking elements of the story, a reminder of the far-reaching consequences of violence and the resilience children must summon in its aftermath. For the community of Prairie Grove and the broader region, the murders shattered a sense of safety and normalcy, a reminder that violence can erupt even in the most unexpected places. And for Devil's Den State Park, long a symbol of natural beauty and peace, the crime cast a shadow that would not soon fade. The trail where the Brinks died closed in the days following the attack, a scar on the landscape and on the hearts of those who cherished it. As the case against Andrew McGann moved forward, it raised fundamental questions about motive, justice, and the capacity for evil in those who outwardly appear ordinary. And while the legal system prepared to hold him accountable, the deeper mystery, why a young teacher would slaughter strangers in front of their children, remained unresolved, a haunting absence of motive that made the crime all the more terrifying, for it suggested that violence can sometimes be not only senseless, but truly incomprehensible. The days following the arrest of Andrew James McGann brought a torrent of emotions across Arkansas and beyond, with grief, fear, and disbelief dominating conversations. as people tried to process how a trusted figure in society, a school teacher who had once been responsible for guiding children, could instead become the alleged perpetrator of one of the state's most gruesome double homicides in recent memory. And as investigators pieced together the timeline of events, the narrative of that July afternoon at Devil's Den State Park became clearer, but no less horrifying. The Brinks, a family of 5 who had recently settled into Prairie Grove, were enjoying what countless families do in northwest Arkansas on a summer weekend, a nature outing designed to bring them closer together and introduce their children to the beauty of their new home state. Clinton, a 43-year-old, described by friends as hardworking, loyal, and devoted to his wife and daughters, led the way along the trail, while Kristen, 41, a woman remembered as warm, protective, and deeply maternal, walked alongside their 2 young daughters, ages 7 and 9, who skipped ahead with the kind of innocence that comes from believing the world is safe when you are with your parents. What none of them knew was that lurking somewhere along that trail was a man with a knife, waiting, by all accounts, with deliberate intent to kill. The preliminary prosecutor's report was chilling in its bluntness. McGann had waited with deliberate purpose and launched his attack on the unsuspecting couple, stabbing both Clinton and Kristen in a frenzied assault, one that was so violent that it left blood along the trail and on his own body. The struggle was fierce, with Clinton fighting to protect his family and Kristen doing everything in her power to get her daughters to safety before turning back, possibly believing she could help her husband or distract the attacker. But tragically, both adults were fatally wounded. Investigators later found evidence of a desperate struggle, defensive wounds on both victims, drops of blood that marked the movement of the fight, and injuries to McGann's hands that suggested he had been cut by his own weapon during the attack. To those who learned of the details later, the horror was compounded by the thought of the Brinks daughters witnessing the chaos, the screams, the terror, and the moment their world was ripped apart, though mercifully they were spared from physical harm because of Kristen's courage in ushering them away. The immediate aftermath of the killings threw Devil's Den State Park into lockdown, with law enforcement rushing to secure the area, closing trails, and calling in additional resources, while families who had been out enjoying the day were evacuated, some realizing only later that they had been within yards of a double murder. Witnesses who had been in the park provided key information, including the sighting of a man emerging from the trail, his face smeared with what looked like blood, climbing into a black sedan before speeding away, a sight that would stick in their memories and later serve as the breakthrough lead for police. That black car, identified as a Kia Stinger, became the focal point of the investigation, with law enforcement issuing alerts to surrounding counties and monitoring businesses, gas stations, and roadways for signs of the vehicle. For several tense days, the killer was at large, and the fear was palpable, with residents of Springdale, Prairie Grove, and nearby towns locking their doors, avoiding parks, and wondering whether the man, who had stabbed 2 hikers to death, might strike again. On July 30th, that fear was somewhat relieved when investigators tracked McGann to a barbershop in Springdale, where his car was parked outside. The officers moved in swiftly, taking him into custody without incident, and immediately noting cuts on his hands, consistent with the struggle described at the crime scene. The Kia was searched, revealing what prosecutors described as blood evidence linking him to the murders, while DNA analysis of blood at the crime scene also pointed directly to him. The legal process moved quickly. McGann was booked into Washington County Jail, charged with 2 counts of capital murder, and held without bond, with prosecutors announcing that they would not waive the death penalty in his case, meaning he faces the possibility of execution if convicted. Yet while the arrest brought closure to the manhunt, it raised 1,000 more questions about motive, identity, and the hidden darkness inside a man who had chosen education as a profession. Who was Andrew James McGann? On the surface, his life was not extraordinary. 28 years old, originally from Oklahoma, with a degree and a career path that had taken him through school districts in Oklahoma and Texas before he arrived in Arkansas. He had most recently been employed in Texas at the Louisville Independent School District, teaching elementary students during the 2022-2023 school year. However, according to the district, he had been placed on administrative leave due to concerns about classroom management, professional judgment, and favoritism towards certain students, though investigators emphasized that no inappropriate conduct with children had been found. He resigned from the district shortly thereafter and relocated to Arkansas, where he was hired to teach at a local school, though his new position had not yet started at the time of the murders. That detail, an educator in between jobs, about to step into a classroom, shocked many who could not reconcile the role of a teacher with the act of killing strangers in cold blood. Friends, nay, eyebores, and former colleagues began to speak out, some describing him as quiet, others as awkward, but none as violent, leaving even those who knew him bewildered by the charges. The prosecutor's preliminary statement made matters more unsettling, claiming that the killings were planned and that McGann had waited with purpose before ambushing the Brinks. Yet at the same time, law enforcement leaders suggested the act was completely random, with no evidence of prior connection between him and the victims. This paradox, planned but random, became the crux of the public's confusion and fear, because if a man could methodically plan to kill but choose his victims randomly, it suggested a kind of unpredictable danger that no one could see coming. For the Brink family, however, the legal intricacies did little to ease their pain. Clinton and Kristen had uprooted their lives from North Dakota to move to Arkansas in hopes of building a new chapter with their 3 daughters. Clinton had found work, Kristen was adjusting to a new community, and their children were exploring their surroundings, embracing the opportunities of a new home. Their youngest 2 daughters, who had survived the attack, were now traumatized by the loss of both parents, while their eldest daughter, who had not been with them on the hike that day, was grieving the unimaginable loss of her family structure. Police confirmed that the children were safe and had been placed in the custody of relatives, but the psychological scars of what they endured would last a lifetime, and community groups quickly began mobilizing to offer counseling, financial support, and prayers for the orphans left behind. For Prairie Grove, the murders became a symbol of how fragile safety is, how violence can intrude even into the most peaceful of settings, and how one family's tragedy can ripple outward to affect an entire region. For Devil's Den State Park, the crime was a stain on its identity, a place once synonymous with beauty and relaxation, now tainted by the memory of bloodshed, with trails closed,